Hello, everybody, and welcome to a little mini episode of the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast for the Pillars of Eternity games, as well as Obsidian Entertainment's upcoming release, Avowed. I'm posting this little mini episode as an exclusively news episode, so if you're looking for lore, unfortunately I don't have anything for you in this episode. What is going on, though, is there is an article that is causing quite a buzz in the Pillars of Eternity and Avowed communities. You may have heard of it. If not, I'm going to go through it on this little episode with you. But on windowscentral.com, one of the authors on that website, Jez Corden, published an article of exclusive information about Avowed. Now, Jez Corden, if I understand correctly, is one of the journalists or people that write for windowscentral.com. He's also got a podcast called The Xbox 2. He mainly focuses on Xbox exclusives as well as Microsoft news and stuff like that. So this is kind of in his purview. Apparently, he has insider sources that gave him firsthand, or I guess secondhand exposure to Avowed's development and where it's at. By reading the article and listening to what he has to say on another podcast, you get the impression that he saw some still photographs of Avowed as well as witnessed some gameplay footage or footage of some renderings anyways. Perhaps as well he might have even seen a document. Who knows? So we're going to go through the details of that article now together. So if you want to see the article in question, you go to windowscentral.com and you can look for the title Xbox Exclusive Avowed, Obsidian Outer Worlds meets Medieval Fantasy. That's the title of the article that he posted. Now, I'm not going to read through the entire thing. It's not that it's super long, but I don't want to just read it verbatim for you guys. That's not really what my go-to is. But thankfully, on the Avowed subreddit, somebody posted something titled, Jez Corden came to save us, in all capital letters. And there is a comment by Purified Venom on that subreddit post where he puts everything in bullet point form. And so thank you, Purified Venom, for doing that. That's going to make this a lot easier because we can go through what he has listed there. And that gives a good overview of this article. So let's get started. So the first thing that is on this list is that Avowed is deep in pre-production, and that's in quotation marks, which very likely means it's still 2 years out. I've seen a lot of other people in other locations say the same thing, that given the state that Jez is reporting Avowed to be in, which is that it is in a pre-alpha state of production, that it's still very likely going to be around 2 years out. So it's looking like 2023 is going to be a safe bet. I know a lot of people were holding out for 2022, but it doesn't look like that's going to be a realistic expectation. It's more likely going to be 2023 at the least. Now, it being in pre-alpha means that it's still in a state where they're creating all the stuff that's going to be in Avowed and they're putting it together. And when it reaches an alpha state, that means that the game is playable, that they can load up the game and they can play it. They're still missing a lot of things like the textures and the lighting and the shadow and whatnot, but it's in a state where everything is kind of put there and they're just testing it out thoroughly. So that is kind of where Avowed is at, if, of course, you believe everything that Jez is saying. From what he has seen, he can confirm that there is first person. That's not something I think anyone is surprised about, given the reveal trailer kind of shows off this first person view, but he has confirmed for sure that what he's seen is first person. He points out, though, that he doesn't know if third person is there. He didn't see it. That doesn't mean that Avowed isn't going to have third person. It doesn't mean that Obsidian isn't going to include it, but from what he saw, only first person was shown off. So we do at least know that's going to be there, but we still don't know about third person. I know a lot of people are really hoping for a third person option, and I am as well. I like having the option for it, even though I think I would play this game in exclusively first person. It's nice to be able to pop in and out of that, especially if you want to just see what your character's looking like. Throughout the entire article, Jez references the Outer Worlds quite a lot. And one of the areas that he references is how the engine is the same as the Outer Worlds, but enhanced. I remember hearing him say on a podcast that he came to this conclusion because he was watching this gameplay footage, and the character in Avowed was able to kind of do that dodge hop like they do in the Outer Worlds. He said that that's reminiscent of it being on the same engine. I'm wondering if that is a safe conclusion to make. I'm not 100% sure on the connection between things like that and the engine. I suppose that if the developers of Obsidian are including similar features of things that are in the Outer Worlds, it would also make sense they would use the same engine. Plus, I don't see them redoing an entire engine just for this one game or using something else when they know that what they used for the Outer Worlds was successful. The Outer Worlds was a smashing success for Obsidian, and so why not use the winning formula, as it were? Hopefully they aren't too formulaic, but that's just my opinion. He does mention that it looks like it is enhanced, so like the Outer Worlds engine, but more up to date because, it's releasing many years after the Outer Worlds came out. The next point on this list is that there will be deep RPG exploration and narrative systems. This is not that surprising. Obsidian is known for depth in their RPGs and for their high-quality narratives and exposition and world building. So the inclusion of this just seems like a moot point for most of us. I think we would assume that, it being an Obsidian game. Avowed will feature multiple class playstyles and borrow from Skyrim's two-handed combat system. Now, this has got some people a little up in arms because they're not 100% sure what this means, and there's a lot of strong opinions on both sides of the fence. On one hand, I know a lot of people who are hoping that Avowed will give you exclusive, selective choices for classes. Like during your character creation, you will select the class of Wizard, or you will select the class of Chanter, and then you will be stuck into that class tree or that path that the class abilities will offer to you. And then there are others who are on the other side of the fence, and they're very much hoping for the more of the Skyrim experience, where all of the skills and abilities are available to you, and how you play the game determines the character that you will build. You get skill points, and you can put them into specific skills and abilities and create a completely unique class build. So there are people on both sides really, really hoping for theirs. And this information doesn't really clarify what it's going to be. It just says Avowed will feature multiple class playstyles and borrow from Skyrim's two-handed combat system. So what I'm guessing, and this is just my guess and a little bit my hope, so perhaps it's a biased response, is that it will be kind of a hybrid of the two, where in character creation you get to pick your specific class, but then as you build that specific character up, you can make that class unique. So if I'm playing as a wizard in one playthrough, and my brother, who will probably play this game, plays as a wizard in his playthrough, they would be vastly different characters from each other. But of course, since they're not fighters or one of them isn't a chanter, there are things that we can't do that other class trees could do, right? So I kind of want a hybridization of both of them personally, and that's what this is consistent with, so maybe we'll get that. Borrowing from Skyrim's two-handed combat system, I think, is just referring to the fact that it looks like we'll be able to have magic or a weapon or an implement in one hand, and then the same thing for the other hand, just like you see in the Elder Scrolls Skyrim. The next point on the list says that weapon enchantments will be a big feature, which is a little bit interesting because if you've played Obsidian games, you'll know that the crafting systems are not usually something to write home about. And that's not to say that they're bad. It's just that they're not crazy overdeveloped. And I think that's just because Obsidian doesn't really focus on that as much. That's not really what they're trying to deliver to the player experience. So if you play Pillars of Eternity or the Outer Worlds, basically as you play the game, you'll collect these random resources that are out in the world if you're actually out there looting. And when you're at your home base or you're somewhere where you have access to do something like crafting, you can go into a menu, select the thing, you see what you have available, and you just hit the A or X button and you craft the thing, or you upgrade the thing, and it's that easy. Whereas in something like Skyrim, you're out in the world and you see iron ore, like a vein of iron ore. So you have to have a pickaxe and then mine that iron ore. Then you take that ore back to town or to wherever you're living, and you go to a smelting place and you smelt the ore down into an ingot. And then you take these ingots and you put them into the forge, and you use the forge to create weapons or armor. Then you take these weapons or armor and you grind them down to make them sharp, or temper them to make them better at defending you. And then you can pair it with leather that you went and got out from skinning an animal, right? The process is very involved in Skyrim for the crafting system, where the process in something like Pillars of Eternity is, well, I collected all this stuff while I was out doing my own thing anyways, and now I'm back here at my stronghold. I'm just going to make some stuff while I'm here. And that's totally fine. I think Bethesda have a different philosophy when it comes to approaching things like a crafting system. I find Bethesda likes to take a thing in a game and ask the question, how can we make this as big as possible? In the sense of how can we make the player do a lot in something. So you take something like crafting and make them do every step possible. And I think it's their way of filling out all the corners of their game, which is totally a valid way to do that. And Obsidian, I think, are more focused on how does this impact the character narrative or the character growth or the story, and how does this impact the actual parts of the game that we're trying to sell that we think are fun. So that's not too surprising. But the fact that it says that it will be a big feature makes me wonder if they're going to do an overhaul on that, or if they're wanting to take a shot at developing a little more of a robust crafting system. That would be cool to see. I'd like to see what they come up with. For those who are excited to play Avowed with firearms, it seems, of course, if you believe Jez's information, that you will be able to play with Pillar-style firearms. Now, when I say firearms in Avowed, I'm talking old school, like real old school, muzzle-loaded type of stuff. So we got arquebuses and blunderbusses and basic pistols, stuff like that. I personally am super excited for something like that. I know that you can't just storm into a building and start shooting up a storm because, it takes forever to load a muzzle-loaded gun. But I like the option for it, and I think it'll add some versatility to the character build that you can make. Now, this next point, I'm not 100% sure what he is saying here, and so I'm going to quote it for you, and then I'm going to try to work it out. And if you have any thoughts, you can email me or send me a message, and I'll give you the contact information at the end of the episode, or it'll be in the description for the episode. Here's the quote. "The combat system seems to be more loadout-based than the Elder Scrolls, which gives you mountains of spells and a gigantic list. Warriors will get access to more physical attacks like swordplay, powerful kicks, and shield bashes, while casters will be given a range of spellbook options to customize and tailor their combat style, with attacks bound to specific buttons." So when I read the words combat and loadout based, my brain immediately jumps to thoughts of Outriders or Destiny, where your loadout determines your power level, which determines what in the game's content you're even allowed to access. And I know that there's no way this is what Jez is referring to when he says loadout based. My best guess is that when you enter into combat, the loadout that you're bringing to it is the particular weapons and enchantments and abilities and spells that you have on your character, and that will be the unique thing that you bring to combat. The only thing that makes me hesitate about saying that's what he's talking about is that, to me, that just seems like normal combat. I mean, if you're in an RPG where you get to create your character as you level up, then anytime you go into combat, you're bringing in the character that you've made from leveling up. The only time this doesn't happen is if you're playing a game where when you level up, it prescribes for you what you get in the next level. You don't get to choose your next skills or abilities. So that's the only case I can see something like that happening where it'd be worth mentioning. I don't think that that's what's going on. I think that what Jez is saying is that you will get to choose unique skills and abilities and weapons and enchantments, etc., and you will bring those into combat, and it'll be more loadout based. I'm not 100% sure what he's getting at there. Now, as I've mentioned before, throughout the article, Jez references the Outer Worlds quite a lot. And at one point in the article, he says this, that if the Outer Worlds was Obsidian's take on a Fallout-style game, Avowed is undoubtedly Obsidian's take on the Elder Scrolls. This makes me want to pause for a second and talk about playing other games to get insights into Avowed's development. Because we don't know anything about Avowed right now, and including all the stuff that we know from Jez, we don't even 100% know what is accurate and what will stay in the game. What games can we play to kind of get some insights or some flavors as to what Avowed's development process might be like? And Jez, I think, nails it on the head when he references the Outer Worlds a lot, because the Outer Worlds is Obsidian's most recent massive success with a team that is comparable to the size that Avowed is getting. With a level of success like that for Obsidian, it makes sense that they would want to repeat some of the processes so that they can duplicate that success. Because even though they want to make a game that they enjoy and other people enjoy, and that is what they're hopefully going to make, they also want to be profitable, and they know the Outer Worlds was profitable. So they're going to try to match some of the development processes, I would imagine. So I think that playing the Outer Worlds would be a good game for seeing how the development process will go for Avowed. Now, as for the narrative and the story, the game that you should obviously go to for that would be Pillars of Eternity 1 or 2. More likely Pillars of Eternity 2, because A, it's more recent, and B, the developers that were involved on Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire are more likely to be still at Obsidian than the ones who were there for the first Pillars of Eternity game, because they've had a lot of staff changes, I imagine, over the last few years. And then lastly, since Avowed is supposedly a first-person epic fantasy style of action RPG, then what is the biggest influential game in the last decade that every developer at Obsidian has probably played and will undoubtedly influence how they approach developing games? I think the answer is easy, is that it is Skyrim. Skyrim is a huge game in the action RPG world. I mean, everybody and their dog has played that game, and there's no way that doesn't impact or influence how the developers at Obsidian approach making games, especially when they're making one that's so similar. I think that between Pillars of Eternity, especially the second one, The Outer Worlds, and The Elder Scrolls Skyrim, we can get a good idea of how Avowed's development process is going to be like and what they might end up coming up with. Obviously, we can't come up with any conclusions about what Avowed will be like or what specific mechanics will be there, but I think it'll kind of give us some insights or like a flavor of what the game could be like or what the process of development will be like. Now, this next point, I was surprised to find out how much contention online there was for this. And I understand the contention now that I've read into it, but I was still surprised because I kind of glossed over this when I first read it, is that Avowed is going to be much more colorful than Skyrim. And so what a lot of people online have kind of expressed concerns for is that this means that Avowed is going to have a more optimistic tone, or that it won't include a lot of mature and darker tones like you see in Pillars of Eternity. I don't think that is the case. I think that what Jez is referring to here is that literally the color scheme, the color palette, or how many colors that are going to be in the game, there's just going to be more of it, right? Like, so if you took a list of every color that was available in Skyrim and you put it on a list, and then you took every color listed that would be on Avowed and you put it in a list, just the list for Avowed would be bigger. Personally, I actually think this will enhance the narrative of the game, and it'll enhance the tones that the Obsidian developers are going to go for, because there's more contrast between lights and darks, and there's more vibrant colors that are there, and there's going to be noticeably dull tones of color compared to that, right? I think it'll make the highs really high and the lows really low in terms of, narrative beats and whatnot. So I'm actually more excited for that. I do understand that aesthetic of the game contributes greatly to the overall tone and feel of the game, and I'm sure Avowed will include some more optimistic parts and some humor in there, of course, but the World of Eora, if you've played Pillars of Eternity, has mature topics in it, and even though there is some humor and some optimism to it, there is a lot of dark tones in that game, and that's something that people really like. And if Obsidian decides they want to go happy-go-lucky, then all power to them. It's their game, and I totally back them up on that. As well, I trust them to make a game like that. But I don't think they will, personally, because they've established what kind of world it's in, and they've established what that world is like in 2 other games. And I think there's a good balance of light and dark tones. And I don't think that more color is going to risk losing the darker side of things or the more mature themes. That's my opinion. And the next point says that it is still unclear if it is going to be a fully open world game or if it's going to be more of a hub world like the Outer Worlds, where the maps are segregated. If you've played any recent Obsidian game, you'll recognize this style immediately. In Pillars of Eternity, this happens. Like, you might be in the Vale Wood early on in the game, and you'll traverse all the way to the edge of the map, and then you click a button and you can go to a new location, such as the Gilded Vale, and then that has its own map. Same with the Outer Worlds. You start off in Edgewater, and there's a map for that area in the world. You go to your ship and you fly to a new location, and that location has its own dedicated map, right? So Obsidian seems to like to make games where there's separate and designated maps for certain areas rather than just one big open world map like Skyrim has. So it's unclear which one it is going to be. Jez thinks, and I also agree, that it's probably going to be a hub world where the map is segregated and separated depending on where you are. But that said, he does make a good point in saying that there were some positions opened up at Obsidian Entertainment for open world development, I suppose it would be. Essentially, there are some jobs that came up at Obsidian to develop open world systems. Now, this could be for something on Grounded, because Grounded, if I understand it, is open world. It's a sandbox, but I mean, it's just one big map. Or it could be something for another game they're working on, because there is a third project that Josh Sawyer is leading at Obsidian Entertainment. It might be for that. So we don't actually know what the open world jobs would be for, if it's even for Avowed. But it does make you think, like, of all the games that are under development, there's Outer Worlds 2, Avowed, and then the unknown third project, and then possibly other ones that we haven't even got clues for. I'm fairly certain the Outer Worlds 2 is going to be a hub world, because it worked well with the Outer Worlds 1, so why wouldn't they repeat that? We don't know anything about Josh Sawyer's game, so can't say with that for sure. It might be grounded, but I think that their team is small and they have everyone involved already that's going to be working on it. So it seems that based on that, there's a decent chance that Avowed could be open world. And I mean, I could see the Obsidian developers taking on that challenge of trying something like that, even though they're used to normally developing maps for certain areas. I think I would prefer open world, but I'm not about to get upset about either one of those options, to be honest. Now, the last point on this list before I continue on into some other stuff is that there's a good chance we'll see gameplay of Avowed at E3 2022. At least that's what Jez says. I'm not too surprised by this. I don't think anyone is. I think some people will respond to this pleasantly, but if pressed, I don't think anyone would be very surprised. The people were expecting this game to possibly come out in 2022. I feel like by 2022, there would at least be some news that they would want to tease us with it, something like that. So I'm not too surprised. Now, that's all that's on this list for the summary on Reddit. That being said, there is one more detail that I want to talk about, and this happened after the article was published. Somebody on Twitter asked Jez whether or not it was going to be played in the Living Lands. And Jez replied very confidently and very sure that it was in fact going to be played in the Living Lands. And as well, in his podcast, Xbox 2, when he was talking about it, he brings up the fact that he didn't really think about it before, but now that someone brought it up to him, yeah, it's totally played in the Living Lands. And I'm paraphrasing what he said. So he seems very, very sure that it's being played in that location in Eora. Now, I'm hesitant to accept this as true. I'm not saying I don't, but I'm hesitant to accept it as true. And there is only one reason why, really. In reading the article that he posted, he refers to the world of Eora as the World of Eternity. Now, I wonder personally, why would he call the world of Eternity when it has the specific name Eora? And in my mind, there's only two possible explanations, or two likely explanations, to be fair. One, he's not as huge of a fan, and he didn't realize that the name of the world is Eora because he didn't get that far into the lore. Or, possibly he is a huge fan, and that just happens to be one of the few pieces of lore he never actually learned. Which, you know what, that's totally possible. That's fair. There's some things in games that I look back on, and I'm like, how did I miss that? Like, how did I miss that glaring detail, right? So there's a chance that he played the game, loves it, but he never learned that the world was called Eora. I bet there's people listening to this that are in that boat, so, that's fair. The other option is that he is such a huge fan that he still refers to it as the placeholder name back in its Kickstarter days. Because if I remember correctly, Pillars of Eternity, when it was in its Kickstarter era, it wasn't called Eora at the time. It was referred to as the World of Eternity, and then it later became Eora. And so maybe he's such a big fan that he's still referring to it back in its original name. If he's calling it the World of Eternity because maybe he saw it on a document somewhere, or maybe it was in a loading screen for the footage he saw, and he doesn't know that it's called Eora, then how can he be confident that it is going to be played in the Living Lands unless he saw something explicitly stating that? Because the Living Lands is not something we see in Pillars of Eternity 1 or 2. In fact, the references to Living Lands is very small, and it's very vague. There's not a lot to go on. I mean, I know I did a whole episode on it, but, I had to really stretch a lot of that stuff out, So it makes me hesitant. Is consistent with leaked information that Spunger gave us on resetera.com last July. So, man, maybe it's looking like it's played in the Living Lands. Again, I'm still hesitant, but we should be with any sort of leaked information. And that leads me to kind of the conclusion of this whole thing, is that there's some people that I've talked to personally about this article, and a few of them have said that this whole article is BS. Like, it's just a load of baloney. It's not true. He's just doing this to get clicks, and it's just to generate hype for something, and some of it may or may not be true, but it's all made up. And then there are others that I've talked to that says, no, man, like, Jez is a trusted guy. I 100% trust this. Everything he says is going to be spot on, and he knows what he's talking about, right? And so there are people on really opposite sides of the spectrum. And I'm not really familiar with Jez's work. I've seen his name here and there, but I'm not really familiar with the writing he does. And so I'm sitting here thinking, okay, do I call this guy a liar and say that everything he is talking about is pretty much false? Or do I say that everything he's putting out here is gospel truth, right? Probably not either of those. It's going to be somewhere in the middle. Do I know Jez Corden to be a guy who would embellish things a little, or would he give some truth and then add a bunch of extra stuff that isn't actually true? Or would he see some things and then draw inferences and conclusions that might not be true, but he thinks are true? I don't know, right? I don't know what is and what is not. One thing I'm very confident in saying, though, and I don't think this is very surprising, is that, since he did put this article out and he is making these claims, I think it's fairly certain that he saw something, right? We can be in contention about what is and what isn't true and whether or not he has got other motives for posting things, but he saw something, right? Like I personally, I think that you don't post something like this unless you had some sort of information that you could at least go off of, regardless of what it was he actually saw or engaged with. These are his impressions of that. He talks about the Outer Worlds feel of it all and the way the color scheme looks and how the combat may or may not work. He doesn't have the details of how these things are going to work or what the final form are going to look like, but this is impressions of it. And you know what? That's totally fine. That's pretty much everything to talk about. Again, if you're wanting to go check it out, you can look it up at windowscentral.com. I'll probably include it in the show notes as well. If you would like to get a hold of me to clarify something I said, correct something I said, ask a question, or start a conversation, you can email me at worldofaora@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at World of Eora. I would love to find out if I said something incorrect because I don't want to put false information out there. As well, if there is an expansion on something I've said, like if any of you out there have knowledge on the game development process and you're like, well, actually, this is how this thing would go, and so here's something you can say about that, let me know. Or if you even just want to ask questions, like, what do you think of such and such? Go for it. I love having these kind of conversations, and I also want to report to you guys good news on this kind of stuff. So I hope you guys will reach out to me, and if not, that's fine. Thanks for tuning in to this exclusive news episode. I will be back just under 2-ish weeks now with another lore episode for you. Thank you guys so much, and I'll catch you next time.